Today the trekkers are taking you to Old Fredericksburg. Our last trek here we focused on the Civil War battles. Today we're going to focus on the colonial period. But first we made a stop at nearby Rocky Run Elementary. We played some trivia games with the students and even got the teachers to play. They also helped us film our intro.
I'm David.
I'm Alfonso.
And I'm Frank. And we're here today at Rocky Run Elementary School in Stafford, Virginia. And today we're headed down to Fredericksburg to talk about colonial times here in Virginia.
So if you're ready to go trekking,
We had a great time visiting here at Rocky Run Elementary School.
it was fantastic meeting all of the Bulldogs.
And it's time for us to head down to colonial Fredericksburg. You guys ready?
I'm ready.
Let's go!
Let's go.
Our first stop is Chatham Manor. Built in 1771 by William Fitzhugh, it has been around since the colonial times. It also played an important part during the Civil War when James Lacey was the owner. Many parts of the house have stayed the same over the years, but there have been significant changes as well. Let's go take a closer look.
So here I am across the Rappahannock River from Fredericksburg at Chatham Manor. It was an old plantation house built in 1771. And the man who owned this house was good friends with George Washington. In fact, George Washington visited this house many times. And one thing cool about this house is that it's one of only 3 houses that both George Washington and Abraham Lincoln visited. The other 2 were Mount Vernon and Berkeley Plantation. So let's take a look around the grounds a little bit.
All right, so we're inside the courtyard here at Chatham Manor, and Dave just showed you the big house. But when you look around, the place is absolutely beautiful. There's a big, huge wall around, and we'll come this way, and there's more gardens this way. And during the Civil War days and colonial days, this didn't look like this at all. There were no walls, there were no gardens. There's actually a sketch made by an officer out here, and the sketch has just the house, and that's it. They use all the wood for building buildings and fireplace to keep houses warm. And this is an agricultural place. They had slaves at this house that worked the fields. So what you see today is not what you would see back in the day. Much better looking today.
Frank and Dave were in the front showing you Chatham Manor and how beautiful it was. Well, here I am in the back of Chatham Manor, and you can see in the background that it's the same view as in the 1800s during the Civil War.
Here's a photo taken during the Civil War times, and you can see some of the landmarks then are still seen here today, like the church steeples. The Union soldiers were on this side of the Rappahannock River, and they did set up cannons like you see behind me, and as they were building their pontoon bridge across the Rappahannock to attack Fredericksburg. And these cannons were providing defense and shooting the city, catching it on fire, blowing up buildings. It was an awful time. And wounded soldiers after the battle, they came back here, they turned Chatham Manor into a hospital, and the famous Claire Barton, who founded the Red Cross, she worked right here taking care of those soldiers.
All right, so I'm standing in front of a couple of really old, gnarly looking trees. Now I'm gonna do my best. I'm thinking they're called catalpa trees. Sorry for all you botanists out there if I mispronounced the name. But the reason these trees are really cool is that they were here during the Civil War. So if you think about what they witnessed, they probably had wounded Civil War soldiers camped right up underneath them after battling in Fredericksburg.
Here you can see how those 2 trees Frank showed you looked during the Civil War times.
So you see the house, and we've been talking about the beauty of the house, but the Union soldiers didn't respect it as much as we are right now. In fact, during the war, what they would do, they ransacked this house. They rode their horses through it. They take the wooden floors because they were using it for firewood because wood was scarce. Even though we see a lot of woods in the background right now, there wasn't that much wood back in the day. And they would just loot and steal things from the house. This was a very bloody house. That means they used this as a hospital for all the wounded soldiers, so there was a lot of pain and a lot of blood and gore going on inside the house.
Well, we aren't going to show you all that blood and gore. Instead, we're going to leave Chatham Manor, and while we're still on the north side of the Rappahannock, we're going to go visit Ferry Farm, George Washington's boyhood home. It's not actually there anymore, but here is what his house may have looked like.
Ferry Farm is a very historical part of American history. That's because this was the boyhood home of George Washington. He moved here in 1738 with his family, and he lived here from the time that he was 6 until he turned 20. And this, boys and girls, is the place of the famous story, George Washington chopping down one of his father's cherry trees, where we get the famous line, "I cannot tell a lie." So check out Ferry Farm and its awesome view of downtown Fredericksburg.
Since there wasn't a lot to show you at Ferry Farm, we're going to cross the Rappahannock River to show you some of the other sights from the colonial times.
Well, there you see the Chatham Manor, and we've crossed over the Rappahannock. Frank and Dave are going to tell you a little bit about historic Fredericksburg.
Here we are at the John Paul Jones house. And John Paul Jones was a famous Navy sailor during the Revolutionary War. And what was so famous about him was he was brave. He sailed all the way to Great Britain and raided the shores. And they called him a pirate over there because of his actions. And he fought with a British ship. And in the famous battle, even though the ship was bigger than him, he kept fighting and fighting and shooting at it, even as his own ship was sinking. And the British commander said, "Are you ready to surrender?" And he said, "I have not yet begun to fight." John Paul Jones, right here in Fredericksburg. Now you may not know this, but Stafford County is where Pocahontas used to live, and she was captured here in Stafford County and brought to Jamestown, where she met John Rolfe, her future lover. This guy reminded me of her.
Another site that was here in the colonial times was Hugh Mercer's Apothecary, which is like a doctor's office or a pharmacy. The sign on the door describes some of the strange medicines they used back then.
They just got some leeches in, so we're heading in. Well, actually, we weren't allowed into the apothecary, so we're just going to film out here. Hugh Mercer owned this apothecary from 1761 to 1776, and he came straight here to Fredericksburg from Scotland, where he lived. He was a surgeon for the army, so he saw a lot of horrendous injuries in the different battles that he was in. And when he came here, he set up this shop, and they had some cool stuff in here, like leeches. Those are things that they put on people's skin to suck their blood when they were sick. They had a lot of different cures, and George Washington's mother was actually one of his patients. But he left in 1776 to go fight in the Revolutionary War. And in one of the battles, the Battle of Princeton, the British soldiers surrounded him. They thought he was George Washington, and they took their bayonets and stabbed him many times, and he died of those injuries. He died a war hero during the Revolutionary War.
Behind me is the home of Mary Washington, who is George Washington's mother. He purchased this house for her when she was ready to leave his boyhood home of Ferry Farm, which is on the other side of the Rappahannock. She moved here in 1772 and lived here until her death in 1789. This house is right up the road from the apothecary, which is where Mary Washington went to see her doctor and get cured for all her illnesses.
George Washington's younger brother Charles also owned a house in Fredericksburg, and it was later turned into a famous tavern. Behind me is the Rising Sun Tavern. This was a tavern, which is a place like a restaurant where people would go to meet, talk with their friends, eat and drink. And George Washington would come here, John Paul Jones would come here. It was just a general meeting place for here in Fredericksburg.
George Washington came here to the Rising Sun Tavern to celebrate the colonists' victory over England in the Revolutionary War. And it's a perfect place for the trekkers to celebrate the end of another podcast.
That's right.
To find more podcasts, go to www.virginiatrekkers.com and keep on trekking. Let's go. Boys and girls, do the trekkers have luck? Well, of course we do. That's why we have Old St. Patrick.
Which is the apothecary, which is where Martha Washington went to her doctor.
You almost said Martha Stewart.
I did say Martha Stewart?
I said you almost did. But I think you said Martha. Her name's Mary.
I did say we just left the apothecary, which is right down the hill towards the river, and that's where Martha... This house is right up the street from the apothecary, which is where Martha...
Well, here we are at the back of Chatham Woods, and it is extraordinary.
Chatham Manor.
Oh,
Chatham Manor, not the neighborhood in Ashland.
All right. Dave and Frank showed you the front of Chatham Woods. Well, here we are.
No, Chatham Manor. Oh my gosh.
And don't be putting this in the.
I can put all those best
Don't
up.
put this in the bloopers.
Come on, Fom. Kids love bloopers. There you go.
Don't put this in the bloopers. If he puts it in the bloopers, I'm telling you right now, he doesn't have my permission.
That's going to be the opening to the bloopers.